Good afternoon, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Jay Wagner calling to order our special council meeting for 4 o'clock Monday, February 20th. To all those here present, thank you for being here, and to anyone listening online, appreciate your online attendance. There's a quorum of council present, and we're ready to do business. The purpose of the meeting, first on the agenda, is a update on our American Rescue Plan Act application process.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Steve Haverlick, Budget and Performance Manager at Financial Services Department. We're just going to walk you through a few slides, kind of giving an update on where things stand with American Rescue Plan funding, spending to date, and allocation of projects to date. And then we're kind of going to walk you through what a draft application would look like. So just to reiterate for everyone, High Point's allocation of American Rescue Plan funds is $22,699,511. To date, a little over $16.8 million has been committed and or spent. The items listed there: critical capital needs, the land purchase for 300 Oak, upfits for 300 Oak, the homeless day shelter, Foxwood Meadows alternate access, and the shared use commercial kitchen. After these commitments, there's a remaining unassigned balance of $5,847,426. This pie chart just kind of shows the breakdown of all of those projects. If you look at the orange in the upper left, that is the unassigned amount, and that's just over 25% of funds that have yet to be assigned for any projects. Just a reminder that back in November of 2021, there were 2 community input sessions held. General themes that emerged through those meetings were employment, housing, infrastructure, education, and community programs / nonprofits. Last few times we've had these updates, we've kind of showed you the list of council priority projects. Targeted neighborhood improvements at $2.5 million is the last one remaining. Ones like the homeless day shelter and upfits to 300 Oak that have been committed were on this list in prior presentations. I did want to make a quick update on the former police building. A facility condition assessment was completed this past July of 2022. This report identified $4.8 million in repairs, renovations that would bring the building back to a usable standard. Some of those repairs and renovations are repair, replacement of the roof, the HVAC system, electrical systems, windows, the exterior facade, plumbing, bathroom fixtures, and making the facility ADA compliant. What this estimate does not include are any changes to the interior layout or any upgrade from existing finishes, i.e. flooring, painting, upgraded technology. Estimated demolition costs of the facility are $150,000. That'd be $95,000 for the demolition and $55,000 for asbestos abatement. Next, we're going to talk about the application process and what a draft application would look like. Just kind of as an FYI, this is not an all-inclusive list, but a pretty consistent list of what some other jurisdictions have used as their criteria. The timing of when those applications happened did affect their criteria. Some were early on in the American Rescue Plan process, in which some of the guidelines were still new. Those guidelines have kind of been loosened, for lack of a better term, and so that gives jurisdictions a little bit more flexibility on how the funds can be used. And so criteria include requests aligning to the jurisdiction's values and priorities, meeting the needs of the community, near-term deployment and delivery with a lasting impact, the best use of one-time infusions of funds, alignment to a jurisdiction's strategic plan, who's the population that's being served, the organization requesting the funds having the capacity and the funding stability to complete their request, and in collaboration with community partners. So next, we're going to talk about kind of application criteria that staff have put together, and then walk you through kind of the in-the-weeds details of the application. And so the high-level bullet points for a High Point application would be the requests are one-time in nature. The request would showcase program sustainability after the funds have been spent, if it applies. It would show some kind of connection to the themes from those community input sessions, or it'd be a priority of the mayor and city council. And so things that the application is asking for, your basic agency information, name, address, phone, email, the agency budget, the amount that's being requested, some supplemental information, including the board of directors of the agency, an IRS nonprofit certification letter, and audited financial statement. This is information that we ask for our annual nonprofit application process, and we feel it's important to include it for this application process. Next, an organizational overview. This would include the mission of the organization and overview, including their major services, programs, and activities. The bulk of the application is questions about the funding request, description of the program or service that's being proposed, including the specific need it would address and the strategy to address the issue, the service delivery process, mentioning staffing, timelines, key activities, a detailed revenue expenditure budget, a question on whether the agency has been awarded ARPA funds from other sources, whether from the federal government, the state government, other local governments, and if so, what's the amount and who's the agency that provided those funds? Who's the target population for the request, and where in the city would this program and/or service be provided? Is the request for the entire budget for the program or service? And if it's a portion of it, how will the remaining funds be acquired by the agency? And if the funding or investment is made by the city, how will the project remain sustainable after the one-time funds are spent? And lastly, just a measuring success section, describing the evaluation tools the agency will use to measure the outcomes and effectiveness of the program or service. And if it's an existing program service, we're asking for a 3-year history of outcomes achieved and the total population served. The timeline as it currently stands, we would go live with applications on Monday, March the 6th. In between that, in the middle of March, we have a tentative date for March 22nd. Once we lock down that date, we'll have that included prior to the applications going live. And this will allow agencies to come to City Hall and ask questions, kind of have a workshop where staff are available to answer questions about the application, if there's any questions about criteria, things of that nature. Monday, April 17th is when applications are due. So this would be a 6-week time period from going live with applications to their due date. Staff would then compile the applications and submit them to the city's finance committee for review in April and May, and then with a hopeful May and June timeline for recommendations for funding to be presented to the High Point City Council. And so that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sounds like a good timeline.
Yeah, this is Councilman Jefferson. It sounds like a great timeline, and the criteria I think is great. I appreciate all the work that was done to give us sort of the landscape to look at this, the full view, so thank you for that. I'm curious, Mayor, if we could consider, though, the deliberations on these, if it's not something, and I know we've talked about why it's going to finance, but I'm thinking about how much money we're talking about allocating to various groups, and if that's not something that might be better to discuss amongst the full group.
It's still going to come to us for approval.
Yeah.
After finance makes a recommendation, it'll still come to us.
Yeah,
We'll still have a say on it.
We'll just be whittling it down to the finalists, and ultimately, we'd want your opinion and feedback on whatever
Yeah,
decision.
and all of us can attend the finance committee meeting. We're just not on the, we're all welcome to attend their meeting anyway.
And if we come up with a proposal, we can always submit it back to Finance Committee to rehash it out or whatever.
Yeah.
Sounds good, then.
That it?
Mayor, if I may, I think there's a couple of decision points that staff was hoping to gather from today. I think first was making sure that we were on the right track with the application process and that council was comfortable with the timeline. But I think it would also be helpful for our agencies to have an idea of the total funding that would be available for agencies to apply for. I think in one of the earlier slides, Stephen, if you'll pull that back up, the slide that talks about the funding that's available. As of right now, I think there's 5.8. One more slide. There's 5.8 million roughly that is unassigned that could be available for the application process. I think it's important for the agencies to have an idea of what that amount is. So if council is comfortable with that full 5.8 million being available, or if there is some discussion about other projects or city projects, that we would need to know that now, so that we could either set aside some portion of it, or we could put the full 5.8 out. But if we just need some direction there. And then I think the last piece is, as it relates to the former police department headquarters, we know that the amount that it would take for us to invest in some of those critical systems, but that doesn't address any need for remodeling that facility to make it useful. So if there is some guidance from council, staff recommendation would be that we move forward with demolishing that building that's on that site, and then we could determine how to use the site, the land at a later date. But at least those two items of the amount that council would like to see available for the agencies, and if you're comfortable with the staff recommendation to demolish the PD headquarters.
What is is there like a time we have to have to use all the funds? Is there like a time?
By the end of this year.
Is it this
They
year?
have to be committed.
Committed.
Yeah.
No.
They have to be committed and then spent by 2026, end of 2025, right? Or
I think it's committed by the end of 24, it's not by the end of 26.
For ARPA funds committed by December 31st, 2024, spent by the 26th. However, the way we've done our existing projects, we've applied them to government services, which has been done to lessen our administrative burden. And so it then frees up the dollars for these projects, so they're essentially become local funds. And so any timeline on spending could be at council's discretion.
So, Tasha, I guess the question would be twofold. One, what are some other cities doing? And two, is it completely up to our discretion as to what percentage, like, none of this could go to nonprofits, or all of this could go to nonprofits? However we want to dole that out.
Council has a discretion at this point of how they would like to spend those remaining dollars, and different cities have done it a number of different ways. Some have had a community process where agencies have applied, and there have been a few that have not. So it really just, depends on, and the level, it all depends on what the council would like to do. So you could, designate that, the full amount, or if there is some smaller amount that you would like to designate for the agencies, then you could do that as well. If there are some existing projects that are in line with council's priorities that you would like to fund with these dollars.
I was asking, I hope that all council would consider that would do to make sure if there's some infrastructure needs, a project we're currently in the middle of that needs some funding, we got to make sure that we consider those as well as any of the nonprofit requests.
Bill, I'm in favor of moving on the Leonard Street building. And the only thing that I can think of, and there's probably more, but there has been some discussion about the pit. And I don't know yet if we're far enough down the road to know what the potential cost of that would be. We had a meeting on it, and there was discussion about first determining what the structural integrity of that site is. And it's something that, honestly, if we do no programming, or we do spend some money so that we can do programming in that site, either way, I think we have an obligation to make sure that that site is safe. It's a city-owned facility, and it's, it's ugly. But it is a city-owned facility, and whether, depending on what the structural integrity of that site is, if it's, if it needs to come down, I don't know, or if it needs to, or if it can be repaired, or if it's okay, I really don't know. But there was a plan out there 10 years ago to spend roughly $1 million to fix it up and make it a place where programming could occur. And it was a pretty cool plan. But that was, are we any farther along on knowing anything about the structural integrity of that site?
Yes. We do have an engineer plan. They have not yet.
I know Reggie was going to look at maybe sending a structural engineer out to look and see what the piers look like there, and whether.
We're still in the process with the structural engineer to evaluate that site. I think if I'm not mistaken, the only other large project that council had talked about early on in the process was neighborhood investment or neighborhood redevelopment, and trying to set aside a portion for that. We hadn't identified a particular neighborhood or a project for that yet, but it had been a placeholder in some earlier conversations.
Yeah, there was 2.5 million pulled out at one time.
There
for that,
was,
right?
there was.
So that would come out of that 5.8.
It would have to come out of the 5.8 at this point. If that number was still the number that council would like to use.
Well, I don't know that, as far as the pit site is, I think we'd be throwing darts right now until we get a little more knowledge about what's going on with that site. But if we wanted to pull funds out as kind of a placeholder, we could certainly look at doing that.
And Mayor Pro Tem Peters, is Southwest Renewal pursuing, at one point they'd drawn designs and
No.
ideas for that. They're not pursuing any
But I
further.
would like to make a comment about the pit. I mean, I know it's been in conversations for a long time. I mean, I think everybody's, and it does have a cool factor. But even, right now, it's owned by the city and it's a safety hazard. So even if, in my opinion, even if we do what we need to do to just make it safe, I mean, then at least it could be sellable. But like at this point, and I think the past attorneys, it's just been very, very difficult to even figure out with the air rights and with all, and I do kind of feel like we need to come to some kind of closure with the pit so that if people ask, they can either purchase it or what can happen with it instead of it just being something that we just keep kicking the can down the road is what I think. Because it's a very valuable piece of property right in the downtown, right next to the transportation terminal. So for it to just be wasteland, I just think it's a disservice for our city.
Yeah, I will, if I can weigh in on this, Mayor, this Councilman Jefferson, as I offer thoughts, my perspective starts with thinking about what we heard from our community through the survey, through the listening sessions, and I think, Stephen, just a little while ago, you all had some slides up there that showed what we heard from our community about. We also received some pretty good, I think, letters of interest and proposals from a number of organizations who do some really key work. As I think about the survey, the listening sessions, these letters of interest and proposals that we're hearing from our community, I also couple that with, ARPA is an acronym, but it stands for the American Rescue Plan Act. And I think, the spirit of it was that when that was signed into action, how can we help America and help the constituents and residents of our great city as we recover from what happened during the pandemic. And so I'm curious to see what we get back in applications that may help us begin to address some real opportunities to recover, to rescue from that. I'm curious to see, the proposals, things we get back and how they line up with this in the community survey, what we've heard in listening sessions. And perhaps with that, we'll begin to, and I almost have this illustration in my mind of seeing how we're checking different boxes of what needs to be addressed, right? There's our community, if they gave us 5 sort of big subjects they want us to touch on, I'd be curious to know how this current pie lays out over those boxes, right? I think there was like housing, infrastructure, things of that nature. So I'm curious to know how this current pie lays out with those boxes. And maybe there's some gaps that we haven't addressed yet. So as we get proposals and things back, we can see those help us fulfill some of those gaps.
If I may say one more thing. So last Wednesday, I was in the Greater High Point Food Alliance Zoom call, and there were some questions about the ARPA funds. And then I do remember after that call, when we were in our retreat, obviously all the nonprofits in the city do really, really great work. But I think one of the things that we were talking about is this is one-time funds, and that we really want to focus on things that can be transformative and sustainable, and that really will make an impact. And I think I think staff has done a pretty good job outlining that in this criteria, because I saw some of that wording a lot.
Yeah.
But is that correct?
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
And
Okay.
And I would want to make sure that every time, because I think you all mentioned there's a Q&A that we talk about at some point when folks come together. I think that kind of point that's been mentioned about how can you leverage the funds, knowing that it is a one-time investment, leverage it to truly spark something or have the greatest value add, return on investment in terms of impact. I will hope that that gets conveyed to applicants. Because in my mind, if we receive an application that, granted, it may help some basic needs, but it's just a gap filler or just a Band-Aid for something, I don't know that I'd be in favor of it. I can't say what this body would do, but I know I wouldn't be in favor of any Band-Aid sort of gap measures in that sense. I'd be looking for the kinds of things that we've not done before, but once it's done, has the catalyst effort, right, that can spur more growth, more impact, and get more folks in the game and help some people really recover from what's happened over the past few years.
Yeah, I would encourage us to try to do things that are going to be impactful with it. But I would be interested to see, though, if during the course of this process, again, speaking about the pit, if we can get some idea of, I'm not saying we're going to do it, I just, some sort of figures or estimate of what it might take and what the current structural situation is with that site. And because then we can, hopefully during the process, that would help inform us as to, how much of this money, it may end up being all of it, or not for the pit, but we may end up distributing it all, or we may have to put a placeholder in there for some of it to do something else with. But at least toward the end of the process, I think the public deserves to know exactly how much we intend to put out.
Sorry, Mayor, final thing, the other thought that just bubbled up, many of us are part of the sort of joint task force with the county and the city of Greensboro, York County Schools, to address some really pressing issues regarding, one being homelessness, another one being transportation. I mean, clearly, when I see homeless day shelter up here, I think that helps us as we trying to do some of that work.
Yeah.
Just being mindful, at least being mindful either how we're communicating that with that task force, and also trying to do our best to understand how the stuff we're doing fits into a bigger sort of strategy. I know that task force has I think they've got a couple big strategic planning conversations coming up this Friday and next Monday. So I think that'll help that. The transportation one, if I'm not mistaken, that conversation really just started. So I'd be surprised if that gets anywhere substantial by the time we make a decision on this, but I don't know. It's percolating in my mind and just want to be mindful of it.
And another thing I'd like to encourage us all to do too is to remember our strategic plan we created. And, I think it would behoove us to look at the potential allocations through whether they fit into the strategic plan we've all agreed upon as well. Is it going to further the goals that we've set for our city in our strategic plan?
Can I ask about the Leonard Street project, the 4.8, does that include, is that simply keeping the structure standing, or does that include upfitting the bathrooms and any?
It is not,
All mechanical.
I think it's primarily mechanical, but I'll let Gary
Right.
explain that.
Yeah, that does not include upfitting or moving walls for programming or anything like that. It's just bringing it back to par, basically.
But it still can be, 4.8 is move-in expense, that's,
Could move in, yes.
The only thing, does it address the ADA compliance?
Limited ADA compliance, and one of the biggest challenges is that there are, it's an old school, so there are a number of restrooms that it would not upfit those restrooms to ADA. It's more of entering the building, ramps, things like that, but not, it wouldn't replace a bathroom to bring it up to ADA compliance.
that was my question, thank you.
Anything else before we move on? Okay, y'all have what you need? You know what we're talking about?
So are we putting?
Have we just confused you?
So is council comfortable putting the full 5.8 out?
I think right now we are with, there could be changes though, depending on what we hear about these other couple of things.
Okay. And we can move, we'll bring the demolition as an agenda item to council as part of the regular finance committee meeting. And-
Quick question, do we ask, sorry, I thought you were pausing. Were you about to say
You're
something? Do we ask in the application, and Stephen, if you said this, I apologize, do we ask applicants if they would still be able to move their projects forward if not given the full applied amount?
There is a question of whether the requested amount fulfills the entire budget of the request, and if it doesn't, plans to acquire the additional funding necessary.
Okay, because that's, I think that's a key point there, trying to figure that one out. Because it could be, I mean, someone submit, we're not able to help you with the full amount you asked for, but we can help you with something and want to ensure that we're not just, putting money out there arbitrarily, but that it can still help them move towards it.
And will these allocations be governed by agreement where if the project doesn't happen, those funds will be clawed back?
It would be.
And the project has to be completed by 26?
I think any spending timelines with how we are applying our use of American Rescue Plan funds would be at the discretion of council.
So they just have to be spent by 26,
By
not
us.
actually completed the project?
I think that there's some question as to how council would like to handle that. In some instances, the ARPA money has been put in on the front end of a project, especially if they're delivering a program or services. In other cases, it may be that you want to have some criteria of where you have a portion of your money go in at different intervals based on how the project is proceeding or based on different performance standards that are established as part of those agreements. Without knowing what the programs or the applications look like, I think it'd be hard to establish a criteria that's one size fits all, because the programs could look very differently.
What are the ARPA criteria? The money has to be
It
allocated by 24, spent by 26?
It does, but remember, most of our money is revenue replacement, so we do have
Right.
a little bit of flexibility there too. I think best case scenario is you want to have it committed and spent as quickly as possible.
Tasha, to your question, you're saying is council comfortable putting the 5.8? I'm just saying that that's the number that we could consider up to, but that's not saying that we're committing 5.8 to anything outside of the city's infrastructure.
We can add that language of up to 5.8.
Yeah, I think that would be the wise choice.
Okay, thank you all.
Can I ask a question of the staff? And just because I see that there's a applicant here, and I know that there's other applications are coming in for other things too, but so as we're talking about the Leonard Street, I know that the bridge proposal had something about that. Has there been any conversations with staff and them about maybe another location, if that's still going to be something that's going to?
We had an initial conversation maybe about, has it been 4 or 5 months ago? Right, of looking at some other locations, and really it was trying to assist with finding a location so things can go ahead and get started.
Okay.
But what the permanent location would be if Leonard Street wasn't an option, we haven't had that level of detail.
Yeah.
That's next.
Well, I just don't want to dismiss the fact that your proposal is.
We've had ongoing conversations, so
Okay,
there.
yeah, so I just didn't want to ignore that y'all are out there. Thank you for being here.
Okay, so next item on the agenda is a closed session for attorney-client privilege and economic development. Do I have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved. Second.
There's a motion, I think it was Councilman Jefferson, seconded by Councilman Williams, to go into closed session. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
I'm having trouble with my computer. Is there anybody here that can help me? Well, I normally go to my internet, I normally go to my